Buddy, as always, happy to see you. Happy to be up here for another message. Um, yeah, I'm definitely feeling good about this one too. I say that about all of them, but this is a fasted message. I've been fasting, I've been praying, so I definitely feel that it's blessed for sure. Yeah. So we're gonna be continuing where I left off, part two. I don't know if I've ever done a part two before because it's always been so far out in between me preaching, but now it's twice a month. Next month it'll be, back to back, and it'll continue like that for a little while. So, very excited. We're going to be continuing where we left off with talking about Joshua and the Israelites as they were getting out of this wilderness that they were in. So we'll be starting in Joshua chapter 1. Last I spoke, I was discussing how the people of Israel were essentially being punished with this 40-year journey in the wilderness with the intent for these old ways of thinking, with these old, people that thought they were still slaves. They still had that slave mentality, and they were still in that old way of life. They had to essentially die off. That way this next generation could walk into the promised land and they could accept the promises of God that were given all the way back to Abraham, also promised to Moses, and now to Joshua. And so that's where we'll be starting in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them, to the Israelites. I'll give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea. In the west, no one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep the book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua receives this word from the Lord saying, it's time. Moses is gone. All those other Israelites that didn't have the faith to walk into the promised land, they're done. They've all died out in the wilderness. Now it's your turn. As long as you are being strong and courageous, I will be with you and you will be successful. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you for your own. But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, the Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men, ready for battle, must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So I want to take a second to think on the mindset of these new fighting men of Israel. For 40 years, all they've had to eat is manna, this dew that came from heaven and that was made into food, into almost like this bread. And for some of them, it's the only food they were ever known. We see in Joshua chapter 5, verse 2 and 7, at the time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeath-roth. Now why he did this is so all those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the wilderness on the way after leaving Egypt. Right? And so this is because there was more men that were born in this wilderness. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness during the journey from Egypt had not. And so this tells us that there's new men who were raised up and they were born in this wilderness. So ever since they had the ability to chew food, all they were eating was manna. Since day one, they were having manna, this resource that came from heaven that they didn't know what it was, they just knew what it did. And that's all they had. And I wanted to point that out as a way to show that a lot of these guys, all their foundation is trusting in the provision of the Lord. All they know is to rely on him to go out every day to collect this manna and to make food that was just enough for that day, because they couldn't save any extra or it would go bad. So all they know is the Lord provides. That's all they know. That's what they experienced since they were born. Another thing I want to point out about these new men is that they were raised to be warriors. The only ones left of the original Exodus were teenagers or younger, because all the fighting men over the age of 20 were gone. So it was only kids that were in their developmental years. And as they were going through this, I can only imagine that their parents were telling them to be conquerors, that they were telling them, don't make the same mistakes that we made. When the time comes and we all pass away, we all die in this wilderness, don't be like us. Don't make that same mistake where you lacked faith. You are a warrior. You are a conqueror. You're supposed to do these things because God has called you into it. That's how they've grown up knowing. And I know that's true because that's what parents do for us nowadays. They tell you, hey, don't go there. Bad things can happen. Don't associate with these people because they're not good for you. And so I would bet that the Israelite parents were doing the very same thing to their kids. Why would they not? And so the point of history, and even the Bible is to see about, past mistakes and avoid those. And that's why I believe Joshua was told 3 times by God and 1 time by man to be strong and courageous, because the mistake that they made the first time around was that they lacked the courage. And he was called to be strong and courageous because he needed the strength to do something, but also the courage to finally carry it out. And the last thing I want to kind of notate about these Israelites is I think they're tired, but they're ready. They're tired of walking, they're tired of eating just manna, and they're tired of waiting to go into the promise. They've been told for so long that they're going to take this promised land once the time is over, but I'm sure they're tired of waiting. They don't want to wait for it anymore. And I can also say that's for sure, because go try to eat crackers for the next 40 years and walk 10 miles a day, and by day 3, you're going to be tired of it. You're not going to do it anymore. But for some of them, that's all they've been doing their whole life. is eating this manna and just wandering around in the wilderness waiting for people to die. So of course they're tired. Of course they're tired of just walking around because they know what's waiting for them on the other side of it. And being tired of a situation isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it can be, but their tiredness of waiting is just making them hungry for more. It's making them hungry for those provisions and those things that are in the promised land that they really want. And I know for me, that would be all that's on my mind, is going into this promised land to take hold of what God has promised me. And I'm sure that they're wanting to do just the same. And so we'll carry on over chapter 2. Not really going to read too much of it, but in the beginning, then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Now, this next section is kind of a different message for a different time. I just wanted to point out how Joshua has already learned from past mistakes. Because with Moses, he sent out 12 spies, and everybody knew about it. But Joshua's sending out 2 secretly, so it's men that he really, really trusts that will deliver a good, accurate report. And he sends them specifically to Jericho, which Jericho is a very strong, fortified city. But he wants to send them out, go look at this place specifically, because this makes a statement. Once we cross over, we go into the promised land, we're going to attack this place specifically because I know they're strong, because I know that they're fortified. And for him, it's not even a question of whether they win or lose. It's just, let's let everybody know that we mean business. We're going to show everybody that God is on our side. So we're not even going to worry about what it looks like when we get there, because I know we'll win. And then Joshua chapter 3 and 4, it's about them crossing over the Jordan River, which is, again, a message for a different day, which I've preached before. But they're taking their first steps into the promised land, and God does another miraculous work for them, where when the ark goes into the water, it stops and they're all able to cross over on this dry ground. And they're finally walking into the promised land that they were told about so long ago, that their ancestors were told about so long ago. And the time is finally coming for them to inherit what they're already supposed to have. And this will bring us to kind of the main section of my message. We're going to be jumping all the way to Joshua chapter 5, verse 13. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now, there's some different views and beliefs on who this commander of the Lord's army is. The popular one is that it's a presence of Jesus, or that it is an actual angel that is the commander of the army, or that it's a sort of representation of God. But either way, it's a person of significant importance. It's a heavenly body that's very, very important, because it says that the ground is holy. And as soon as Joshua hears these things, he's already bowing down in reverence and calling himself a servant. So he recognizes that in some way, shape, or form, it's God. And then chapter 6, verse 1. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March round the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in." So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And he ordered the army, "Advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." So Joshua is given a command for battle. And something that I find kind of weird about this, the Lord said that they were delivered into his hands. Now for me, I don't really see that as them being delivered, because I would see being delivered as strolling up to the gates, they all walk out and, "Hey, we surrender." But instead, they're all holed up into the city. They're well fortified, but they're all in one place. And so God is telling these people, like, because I'm with you, it's not even going to be a question about whether you win or lose. So I've brought them all here together so they can all be defeated at one time. As long as they follow this obedience, these instructions of walking around the city, for the 7 days, and then the army being silent while they blow the trumpets. 7th day they shout, goes down. As long as they are following this obedience, they will win. That's something that's been promised for a long time for them. And then kind of talking a little bit more about Jericho to discuss what it is. Now, Jericho, the name meant city of fragrance. It's one of the earliest cities that has been continuously developed. It had a lot of wealth and power. You would need wealth and power to build walls. They don't just come out of nowhere. And with the walls, there was different height projections. A low estimate was that it was 12 feet high, 6 feet wide, made completely of stone. That's a serious wall. That's a big deal. That's not something that just falls apart. And these Israelites, they don't have any siege equipment with them. They don't have these battering rams. They don't have catapults. They don't have anything that would take down a wall, especially not one of this size. And then there's even a high estimate of a 48-foot wall. It has that same 12 feet of stone, 6 feet wide at the base, but then the rest of it was mud brick on top, so just making it even more impossible to get into this well-fortified city. Now this message of Jericho, any preacher who's ever preached at some point has spoken about Jericho. I know, I've talked about it myself before, how it's such a great moment of faith, like, oh yeah, you walk around the city, 7 different times, they're walking around, such faith. How crazy it was for them to do that. I don't get how they did it. And that's true. That's accurate to say it's a sign of faith, sure. But as you read the Bible in different stages of your life, as you see things in different times, you interpret it differently. And when I read it this time, it became not as much of this show of faith, because these Israelites have had faith for the last 40 years to receive manna and wait for God's promise, and they walked right into the promised land. They have faith. So for them to go from, let's say, 40 years of walking to only 7 days, well, it's 7 days. 7 days is nothing. They've been doing it, for some of them, their entire life they've been walking around. So walk around a city for another 7 days. That's a vacation. That's easy. You know, we can do that. We can walk around that city for 7 days, but I read it this time and it became not so much a demonstration of faith, but a practice in patience. So these Israelites, you know, they're hungry to walk into the promised land. They're ready to slay their enemies. They're ready to take over everything, you know, because they want it so bad. They've been told, for some of them since the day they were born, you're going to be great. But now they get to the city of Jericho. They've walked into their promised land, but God says, wait. They could have walked up, walls would have fallen down right away. God can do that. Of course he can. He did it anyways. He could have done that right away. But it's as they walked into their promise, as they're taking what God has given them, he's still saying you have to wait a little bit more. I know it's hard. I know it doesn't make sense. I know you're going to walk around this city and you want it to be over, but you still have to wait for me. You still have to let me be there with you. Because walking in and just conquering these people, killing all their enemies, if it was easy, it would have just been the beginning of pride for them. If they could just walk in and they could have it all, man, that's how pride starts. That's how they begin a journey of, hey, it's our strength because we're warriors, because we're so strong. We've been training for this. We've been wanting this. That's why we won. Yeah, God made the walls fall down, but then everything was just us after that. But that's not true. That's why God had to make them wait. He had to make them wait just a little bit longer to right when they were on the edge of finally doing what they were called to do, they still had to wait just a little bit. And so I want to ask you today, do you ever feel like you're in your promise, but you're still waiting? Yes. You ever feel like you're there? You're in the promised land, and you know you've been relying on God for so long, and you're there, but sometimes you still just have to wait. It's such a hard question, a hard experience to deal with. You know, I feel like I'm there myself. You know, I've spoken to a lot of you about going to Liberty to learn more about the Word, but I still have to wait 7 months. And right now it's still a maybe if I'll be able to go, because it's the task and the resource seems so incredibly difficult. But I hope I can really be like these Israelite men where they heard, walk around the city for 7 days. On the seventh day, when you guys shout, the walls fall down. Man, that's really what I pray for my own life, is that even walking in promise, even being in it, even being in the middle of it, still having the patience to wait for it. So let's just read the end of this real quick. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time, the trumpets were sounding. But Joshua had commanded the army, do not give a war cry. Do not raise your voices. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. And the army returned to the camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets, and went forward. 7's mentioned so many times because in the Bible, 7 is the number for completion. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord. While the trumpets kept sounding, so on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to camp. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day, they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city, and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house will be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so do not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. The Lord meant business, and so did the Israelites. They were so faithful to him in this situation. They had so much patience to say, okay, God, you want us to wait? We're going to wait on it, if that's what it takes. And then something that I really didn't even recognize until now, reading this, is that everything was devoted to God. When they took their promise, when they're taking these things, all these different items that would be seen as, a blessing in life, to have all these nice jewels and nice clothes, all this stuff, all this importance, even when you have it, devote it to God. Even when you're walking in your promise, recognize that once you're in it, once you're doing it, and something's coming from it, it all has to be devoted back to God. Because so little can really come from us. Such a very, very tiny amount of strength and resource that we have. And so God is needed for all of it. He has promised all of us different things. We're all called to different things. And as you reach that promised land, maybe right now you are in a season of wilderness. Maybe you are in a season where God's having you walk around a little bit because something that's on the inside, some type of old feeling, some type of old thought still has to die off before you can get into that promised land. But just know when you get into that promised land, sometimes you might have to wait a little bit longer, but it'll be there. And God will always be faithful to complete in you what he's put in you, so long as you stick with him and follow him. Let me pray. God, I thank you for the strength and the courage that you provide to us. As we go through these different seasons in our life, as we go through a season of wilderness, or if we go through a season of having to wait and be patient, even once we're in our promised land, Lord, I just pray that you continue to strengthen us in those situations. That when it seems like it's impossible, it's some task that we can't overcome, when we're looking at these giant city walls and we wonder, how can they ever fall down? God, I just pray you give us the strength to endure and to wait on your timing, because you have promised that we will be victorious. As long as we stay strong and courageous in your word and we never turn from it, not to the right or to the left, but that we stay on your path, God. And I pray that you always give us the knowledge, you always give us the wisdom to see that path and seek it out. I thank you, Lord, for all you have done for us and all that you will continue to do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. There is a song. There's always a song. Keith, play the song. Thanks.